Hi. I've decided I'm going to do a couple of short videos around bagpipe technique. It's specifically for a group of learners that I take. But you know, if there's other people that get benefit from it, then that's great. The um, the main thing I think is these days, especially with things like YouTube and what have you, there's really a great source of information for people that play bagpipes on the web. Um, and some of it's really great quality and some of it maybe not. But um, tonight, what I'll talk about, the first one really in this little series, will be talking a little bit about blowing technique. And I'll just preface this with the give reference to a guy called Piper Dojo. I don't know if that's his name, but that's his sort of website, and you can look him up on just Google him or go on Facebook. I think he's there as well. And he does a great deal of pretty good quality content, so I definitely urge you to, if you're learning or even if you're an advanced player and you want to learn more and improve, definitely have a look at his stuff. And he's got some great stuff around the process, the psychology as well. And around the topic of blowing, the reason why I chose to use his example, and I'll try and put a link in the bottom of this video, is that through all my years in piping, I must agree that it's always been about blow steady, right? So it's just this thing, blow steady. But he makes the point that blowing steady without a reference doesn't make much sense. And so he's done a great job of articulating what exactly that means. And I'll try to paraphrase that and put it in a very practical way that you can practice that and use it without necessarily showing you with pipes tonight. I'll probably show you another time. So here's the thing. When it comes to blowing at a pitch, let's look at the sort of physical properties of a bagpipe reed. You've got the drones. The drones is one thing. The drones don't tend to vary as much in pitch as a chanter reed does, based on the pressure of the blowing. But here's something to consider. If you look at the physical properties of the reed, or if you imagine you take something like something less harmonic, like a little whistle, like a referee whistle, it's got a little ball in it, and you blow it. If you blow it too softly, basically you get the sound, but you don't get the resonance of the ball hitting the inside of the chamber. If you blow a little bit harder, you get that sort of sweet spot, where everything is vibrating. And the reason for that really is that the harmonics are working. If you know anything about sort of sound and that sort of stuff, the waveforms and the harmonics are at their sort of fullest at that point, so it's like a sweet spot. And if you blow it too hard, what will tend to happen is that the ball will stop spinning in the chamber, and you'll just have this very high pitched sort of squeal coming through the mouth, where the actual sound travels across and makes the vibration. So that's an example. The bagpipe reed is probably not much different if you think about it. It's two little sheets of cane in most instances that are vibrating together. If you blow the reed too softly, basically the vibration is not full enough to produce all of the fundamental sounds plus harmonics. Now the harmonics basically are sort of secondary waveforms that give the sound a quality of timbre, sort of a brightness, if you will. And so as you blow the reed, when you're blowing soft, it's just vibrating like this. As you blow harder, it vibrates more, and you get to a spot where the sound spectrum is at its most full, in simple layman's terms, and that's the sweet spot. And then if you keep blowing the reeds, the vibration tends to actually become, I wouldn't say disharmonic, but it's not as sweet in the sound. So what happens is it becomes a lot more rigid and more linear, and that's because a lot of those harmonic sounds are coming out because the vibration, I don't know if it's vibrating too quickly or if it's too wide, the actual amplitude, but it's just what happens. And I suppose if you go to a point as well, like it'll actually stop vibrating. Sometimes if you can really over blow a reed, that it won't vibrate anymore, or in some instances what happens as well is it squawks. There are other reasons for squawking, by the way, which also have to do with covering the sound holes and humidity, temperature, those sorts of things. And there's a whole, we could probably do a couple of hours of video on just that alone. But I think the key takeout here is that there's a spectrum from low pressure to middle pressure to high pressure, where the reed is basically at its most natural state and vibrating at its fullest, and producing a nice full sound. Okay, so when you I'll give you an idea of how you can actually practice this and put it into practice. But what you need to do is remember that you need to be able to find where that sweet spot is. I know very experienced pipers that do blow steady, obviously, and they tend to blow steady, but on the high end of that spectrum. So they pass the sweet spot, and they're there, and you can hear they're nice and steady, and they're strong, and it's all locked in nicely. But it's just kind of, it's missing that that fullness. The other thing is probably more common, where people underblow, if you will, and so what happens there is they're on the low side of the spectrum. It probably sounds a bit sweeter than it does on the top side, but there's always that risk that if the pressure changes ever so slightly, that it cuts out, and a lot of pipers struggle from that. So there's a couple of techniques you can use to find the sweet spot. I can think of three basically. The first one is to use a manometer, a manometer. If you look at the Piper Dojo side, he'll give you an example of what that is. I'm not sure if you can buy that sort of thing online. I'm sure you can find instructions on how to make one. It's really like a piece of tubing. It's like a year 8 science experiment with water in it, and it's got an air outlet, and it goes in somewhere. I've never used one myself, but that's a very physical way of being able to measure and find where that sweet spot is. And then you can basically mark it, and so you can blow, and you can have a visual reference of the 2 points that you want to be maintaining your pressure in between. So that's a very physical way of doing it. I've heard from many people it works pretty well if it's well set up. Personally, I've never used one, but something to consider. The second thing you can do is use a tuning app. So with Android or iPhone, iOS, there's a number of tuning apps. Some of them are great, some of them not so much. You could probably choose from a range of them. I would recommend something like the Braw app. There's another video I've done on that, spelled B-R-A-W. And that app basically will allow you to set it automatically picks up the pitch of the chanter, and you can take a note like E or something like that, and you can find it'll actually the needle will point you to where that middle point is relative to the calibrated low A pitch, which it picks up automatically. So that definitely helps you in terms of finding the sweet spot, because if you're blowing low A and it's assuming that you are on the sweet spot for low A, then all the other notes should be aligned. But that's neither here nor there. That brings me to the third thing, which I think is really what you need to combine two methods. The third thing is really using your ears. So listening to it and experimenting. So taking a note. E is probably a good one because it doesn't really require as much. There's a slightly harder pressure on the bottom note. In reality, there's a slight difference in pitch because of the length of the tube and the air that's traveling through it. Just simple mechanics, right? But what you can do is take a note like E, regardless of whether it's pitched correctly. I mean, it doesn't really matter. That's relative, because what you're looking for here is timbre. And so you can take a note like E, you can blow it, and then experiment. So blow it right on the low side, and then listen to it as you blow harder and harder. So start off really low, so you just get it sounding, blow harder and harder, and listen to it. You'll hear that sound will do that, and then it'll start closing off as you go up to the top side. So if you combine that with a tuning app like the Brawl, for example, you can actually watch the needle, and as you're blowing, when you get to the point where you're hearing that sweet sound or that full sound, take a note of where you are on the needle. So don't just say it has to be in the middle, because that's for tuning absolute pitch. This is for finding the sweet spot. So if that note happens to be at the middle, great. If it doesn't, it might be slightly to the right or the left, but it's just a reference for you. So it's a visual reference, so you can say, right, my sweet spot is sitting at like 10 cents above the middle mark, or slightly to the left, for example. Pay no attention as to whether the note is in tune or not. You're just looking for that perfect harmonic. Once you find that point, then what you can do is basically take note of where it is, and then take your pipes, and then now try and focus on blowing your E, for example, at that pitch for at that point for about, start real small, start with 30 seconds or a minute. You'll be amazed at how hard it is to blow steady even just for a minute, and it gets even harder once you're playing tunes because there's a lot of mechanical processes going on. So start with a minute, and then just as you're practicing, do it as part of your practice routine. So play it for a minute every day, every second day, whatever your routine is, and then start to increase it. Once you know that you can do it for a minute, then increase it 2 minutes, maybe next week, 3 minutes. I think once you're getting up to sort of 3 minutes and you can hold a note, then maybe start varying the notes. So try a different note, maybe low A, F, high A is quite difficult to blow steady. And then start using exactly the same method for each note. And if you make it part of your practice routine as sort of, it's very, seems almost facile, but it's not really music. It's more like you know, lifting weights. But it's if you build it into your routine, you'll find that you'll see massive improvement in your blowing overall. Whereas I think a lot of pipers never really do this. They just sort of get on pipes, start playing in a band, and that's about it. Now, let's talk a little bit about, now that we've given you the options for the measurement part, let's talk a little bit about the actual technique. So, understanding that you want to keep a steady pressure. When you're blowing, there's two things to remember. The one is you've got the bag, it's under your arm, it's full, and you're blowing. When you're blowing, I've heard different ways of expressing this, but one of the ways it's put is blow your arm off of the bag. It's kind of a weird, contradictory way to say things. Whenever someone says that to me, I literally think of the arm blowing up. But anyway, what happens here is that what that's trying to say is that there's two processes. There's one where the pressure of your arm is squeezing against the bag. The other is where there's air going through the blow piece into the bag. Okay, so it's kind of like the clutch and the petrol on a car, you know, the accelerator. And so, you know, if you're taking the car as an example, when you're driving, you have like a slow motion sort of handover between those two processes. Okay. If you drop the clutch and you do that with the petrol and you're not doing it in synchronous, what will happen is the car will tend to stutter or stall. Piping is probably a very good example of that. So let's take the piping example. Let's call the arm the clutch and the blow piece the accelerator. If you're blowing, you're accelerating through the blow piece, and the clutch is the arm. If you basically squeezing, okay, and you're blowing at the, you're squeezing, and then you're not blowing at the same time. So in other words, you're just squeezing, you squeeze, and then you blow. Okay, you're basically doing this or you're doing that. There's no sort of handover between the two processes. So what you need to be doing really is sort of squeezing and blowing at the same time. But why we say blowing the arm off the bag is that you need to keep the pressure of the arm on the bag all the time. Okay, and try and get into a cycle where there's a very subtle handover between, because you do have to take a breath, right? It's not a didgeridoo, or if you can do circular breathing, well then probably watching the wrong video. But you want to try and get to the point where you know that you're blowing, you're going to take a breath. You're going to probably need to, I wouldn't say put more pressure on the arm, but there's going to be a slight handover. So you don't want to be going blow, 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 and then just stop and then do nothing with the arm. So if you are taking a breath, you know, you're going to want to make sure that that arm's still on pressure on the bag. In fact, there's a subtle, probably you might find subtly that you'll get into the habit where you're squeezing only like ever so slightly more. But try not to think of it that way. Just think of it that you always want to be keeping the pressure on the bag with the arm, and so your blowing is basically just changing the amount of air that's in the bag, in essence. So, you know, whether the bag's full or it's slightly less than full because you're taking a breath, the pressure from the arm is basically more or less always the same. You don't want to be going, okay, I'm blowing now so I won't squeeze anymore. That's a common mistake. The other thing you don't want to do is, I'm squeezing now so I won't blow anymore. Okay, so try and get a balance between that blowing, squeezing thing, and try and maintain a steady pressure with the arm. So in other words, you're blowing the arm off the bag, so you're just changing the amount of volume of air that's in the bag. I hope that makes sense. Now, the other thing to consider there is that I think the best reference, besides the visual reference that I've spoken to now, which are really good, especially as a learning piper, but even more advanced pipers, having a visual reference is a great way because it's very clear. But I think the better reference than that even is more like metaphysical. So that's the sort of that listening. So you're letting the sound drive your body movements, and that's when you get to the point where you're not overthinking the actual technique. You're listening with your ears. You're looking for that sweet spot because you've been practicing that with the long notes that you've been playing, and so now your ears are looking for that sweet spot. And if you're playing and you're looking for the sweet spot with your ears, the strange thing is you'll find that your body will tend to do what it needs to do to get there. I know it sounds really odd, but just listening to your drones and the note, finding that sound where you know that it's comfortable and sounds well, your body will tend to adapt accordingly. And so you won't be overthinking about whether do I blow, squeeze, or what am I doing. All you'll really be thinking about is monitoring, sort of controlling the overall sound. And so your body will make the slight little adjustments that it needs to maintain that, because it's trial and error. Your ears will listen, you'll think about it and you go, oh, I dropped off or I choked there. And so if you keep focusing and just bring it back into the point where it needs to be, then you'll find that your body will make those little subtle adjustments that it needs to maintain that steady pressure, or a steady sound, should I say, and pressure. So that in a nutshell is the blowing thing. Like I said, if you get a chance, have a look at the Piper Jojo link. I'll put it down below. And we'll have a look at some of the basic stuff like, you know, startups, cutouts, those sorts of things. And, you know, once you get into a point where your pipes sound good, you know, you don't have to be like a, you know, 11th Dan piper or anything like that. You don't need to be the best piper in the world to do this. But if you do the basics well, you also find, even as if you don't have the perfect natural talent, you'll also enjoy it a lot more. You'll start to enjoy it because it sounds good. And people that you play for, or you play, you know, in front of people at various occasions, as we all do, will appreciate it more, because you're not going to sound like you know, so many pipers come on and they have this awful sound. And I don't think anybody, you know, really needs to do that. It's just learning a little bit of technique, and even if your finger movements and all of that aren't that of a 5-star piper, you can still sound good. You know, even just playing really simple tunes. So there you go. Good luck with that. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any comments or if you have any questions, then, you know, feel free to post them below, or however else you can get hold of me. Have a good one. Cheers.